when a cruel and merciless cop decided to arrest a 9-year-old black girl for just playing in the street. She thought no one would oppose her authority. However, only 10 short minutes later, the police officer deeply regretted her actions. As the policewoman read what she recognized as her Miranda rights, little Erica could do nothing but cry and ask herself what was happening. Her parents had repeatedly told her that as a black child, she would always have to be twice as careful and respectful than her peers, especially around armed officers. But this time, she was almost certain that she had done nothing wrong. A few days earlier, her parents had gifted her a mini scooter, and she'd been riding it ever since. She loved that toy, and since her house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, she rarely had to worry about cars interrupting her playtime. She had been riding and singing along to the lyrics of her favorite songs when she had spotted the police car approaching. It was unusual to see an officer so close to her house, but she hadn't had any reason to worry. After all, she was doing nothing wrong. Still, she had moved closer to the sidewalk, just in case the car decided to drive until the end of the street. But the policewoman had stopped the car right in front of her, and from that moment on, everything had been a blur. While Erica cried and babbled, Officer Sandra snarled in frustration. That child was truly getting on her nerves, not to mention the young man next to her who kept questioning her authority. Sandra was a police officer who had worked in the bustling streets of Chicago for several years. She didn't need anyone telling her what she could or couldn't do. She embodied the law, which meant she was always right. It wasn't her fault if some people couldn't see it. If she were to be honest, most people couldn't see it. She'd been forced to interact with a ton of civilians who thought she was too strict, or sometimes even in the wrong. So despite carrying out her duties diligently, she had failed to establish a positive relationship with the community. She thought that the citizens simply resented her because she held so much power over them, but the truth was very different. Officer Sandra possessed a snobby demeanor and often displayed selfishness and arrogance towards others. She was unapproachable and seemed to lack any empathy or understanding for how other people felt. And that fateful day, Sandra found herself in a situation that would test her limits and ultimately lead her into a whole lot of trouble. She was patrolling the suburbs alongside her rookie partner, whose naivety and lack of experience annoyed her greatly. It was not her choice to take on the rookie, but he had been placed with her as she had a lot of experience. Still, just because she had been given this honor didn't mean that Sandra liked it. In fact, she found the rookie's questions tiresome and irritating. As the two of them drove through the quiet neighborhoods, Sandra's sharp eyes spotted a little black girl, no older than 10, joyfully riding her scooter around on the deserted road. She was minding her own business and seemed to be singing little songs to herself as she happily played. Sandra felt immediately annoyed with her. Didn't she know how dangerous it was to ride a scooter in the street? Where were her parents? Couldn't she hear how grating her voice was? She couldn't imagine how frustrated her neighbors must be with her. But thankfully, the law was here and would be restoring the order in the neighborhood. Sandra slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a sudden halt. Startled, the rookie questioned what the problem was. Officer Sandra pointed at the child in the street and snarled, "That girl's a menace and a danger to everyone," she barked. Her partner was struggling to understand her exaggerated response. It was just a little girl playing on her scooter, right? With her trademark condescension, Sandra sneered at her rookie partner. Only a young, inexperienced cop could mistake such an inconvenience for just a little girl playing on her scooter. She believed that her vast experience in assessing dangers far surpassed his, and thus elevated her to a superior position within the police force. With her partner relegated to a mere observer, Sandra climbed out of the vehicle, slamming the door behind her. She marched over to the young girl, determined to exercise her authority. She approached the innocent child, demanding to know her name and the reasons for her suspicious behavior. The girl brought her scooter to a halt and looked at Officer Sandra with a confused look on her face. The policewoman towered over the young girl and looked down on her with a sharp and nasty face, as if she were dealing with the most dangerous and high-profile criminal in the city. Still, she tried to remember what her parents had taught her about police officers. She needed to speak clearly and plainly, try not to fumble with her words, and only answer the questions they asked without providing additional information that might sound confusing. She introduced herself as Erica and told the policewoman that she wasn't doing anything wrong. The scooter was hers and she could prove it. Her father had specifically hung a small bell to one of the handles and her name was on it. But the officer didn't seem interested in the ownership of the scooter. She demanded to know why she was riding in the streets, why she was singing, and which of her parents had given her permission to be out by herself. Which house did she live in, and so forth. The questions plummeted on the little girl like a hailstorm, and Officer Carrington seemed to care that she was asking too many too fast. All the while, Erica stumbled to find the words to say as the authoritative figure pressed her for answers. The rookie, growing increasingly disheartened and disturbed by Carrington's behavior, jumped out of the car and tried to reason with her. He informed her that the girl was simply playing in front of her own house and posed no threat to anyone. There were even no cars around on this quiet street, meaning that she wasn't getting in the way of traffic or going to cause any damage to any vehicles. She was simply playing, as little girls do. However, Sandra arrogantly once again brushed off his understanding, belittling him once again. She staunchly believed that her approach was inherently superior to his, disregarding his opinions as insignificant and not worthy of her time. As Sandra continued her relentless interrogation of the terrified young girl, tears started to well up in her eyes and fall freely down her face. Her speech became slurred, and the officers started mocking her for her hesitation. Was she trying to stall the interrogation, or was she simply lying about who she was? Perhaps a trip to the police station would jog her memory and untie her tongue, she threatened. Of course, her words did nothing to put the little girl at ease. Overwhelmed and confused, Erica struggled to comprehend why she was being treated so harshly. Sandra's unrelenting questioning made her feel like a hardened criminal, crumbling away the last remnants of her innocence. Officer Sandra refused to be moved or swayed by the young girl's show of emotion. She believed those were crying crocodile tears and that the little girl did not really feel sorry for whatever crime she may have committed. Without warning, Sandra pulled out her handcuffs, her intentions clear. With a sense of shocking cruelty, she proceeded to cuff the now sobbing Leisha. The scooter fell to the ground with a clank, and Officer Sandra kicked it to one side with her foot, scratching the paintwork on its body. The rookie, desperate to intervene and unable to bear witness to his partner's abuse of power any longer, attempted to protest. However, his voice was swiftly silenced by Sandra's fierce reprimand. She turned, pointing her finger into his face, and told him that if she heard another word from him that she would report him to the police board and he would never become a fully certified officer. Suddenly scared for his career, the rookie shut his mouth and looked down at the ground. Tears welled up in his eyes as he contemplated not only his future, but the sad and confused look on young Erica's face. He was truly torn between helping the young girl and ensuring that he would be able to become a full police officer and fulfill his own childhood dreams. It was an impossible situation for the rookie to find himself in, and so he just stood silently to one side. Officer Sandra began to read poor little Erica her Miranda rights, and the little girl looked like a deer in the headlights. She knew exactly what those words meant. She had heard her own father repeat them like a mantra more than once in the morning when he tied his tie in front of the mirror. They meant she was being arrested because she had been found guilty of something. What this something was, she didn't know. She also didn't know what to do, and she didn't understand how she'd gotten into this position. Sandra grasped the cuffs that held Erica's hands together and began to walk her back to the patrol car. The little girl was now sobbing and dragging her feet. She didn't want to go to the police station. What if they ended up arresting her and she was thrown in jail with scary criminals? Would they even let her place a call to her mom? Erica yelled at Officer Sandra to let her go fetch her parents first, but the cops seemed determined to drag her to the station. But in a moment of divine justice, Erica's father emerged from the house, his voice thundering across the garden. Furious at the sight of his terrified daughter and restraints, he wasted no time in demanding her immediate release. Officer Sandra initially refused and demanded that the man step away from the scene. He could come to the station in his own car and deal with his daughter's charges there. But the man insisted she tell him exactly what his little girl had done to deserve such treatment. If the officer was able to provide a reason, then he would allow her to take his daughter away. Officer Sandra burst out laughing. Allow? She repeated. She was the embodiment of the law and didn't need anyone to allow her to do her job. However, she would do him the grace of explaining why she was taking the child away in handcuffs. When she said that she was arresting her because she was singing and writing, the man in front of her was left speechless. Sandra assumed it was because he was finally seeing her point and smirked. But in truth, he was at a loss for words because he couldn't believe that a grown woman, and a cop at that, could be so mean as to deprive a little child of her freedom and joy. Sandra rolled her eyes. Freedom and joy? If anything, the girl was taking away the freedom and joy of other people by being so annoying in a public space. She expected both father and daughter to apologize to the neighbors, despite the fact that no one was actually around. For Officer Sandra, their absence was confirmation enough that they couldn't stand the prospect of being around such an annoying child. And by arresting her, she was doing the community a big favor. When the man opened his mouth next, Officer Sandra expected him to try and plead with her again. However, what Erica's dad said next absolutely disarmed the arrogant cop. The man told her that he was Captain Ronald and made it abundantly clear that he held a position of authority within the police force, leaving Sandra stunned and momentarily speechless. Captain Ronald said that he had never stumbled upon such a zealous cop in all his years in the police force, and that he was finding it very, very hard to believe that she would really arrest a 9-year-old child because she believed she was disturbing the community, especially since he hadn't heard of a single complaint. Attempting to save face, Sandra stumbled upon an elaborate lie, falsely claiming that Erica had been causing trouble within the neighborhood, and she had been called to solve the issue. She told Captain Ronald that the neighbors had been complaining that she was making too much noise and riding the scooter around on their property. However, the rookie, who had silently endured Sandra's arrogance until now, finally found his voice. He bravely recounted the events with unyielding clarity, exposing Sandra's callous disregard for the truth and her arrogant cruelty. The rookie could feel Sandra's eyes burning into him, but he didn't care. He had seen enough to know that she was a bad police officer and that he didn't want to turn out anything like her. So he spoke the truth as Captain Ronald listened intently. He also produced a key out of his pocket and uncuffed the shaking little girl in front of him. Erica, now free of the handcuffs, ran over to her father, who hugged her tightly and made sure that she was okay, as he listened to the rookie's telling of the events. As the rookie finished speaking, Captain Ronald turned and unleashed his fury upon Sandra. His face was an angry shade of crimson, and his words rained upon the policewoman like a hailstorm. The commotion attracted the attention of a few neighbors, who stepped out of their homes and gathered round. When they realized what had happened, they felt just as outraged as Captain Ronald. Officer Sandra had tried to pin her actions on them, pretending to have received a complaint they had never made. Erica was a lovely little girl, and they had never had anything to say about her riding her scooter in the street. She wasn't bothering anyone, and her sweet smile brought them happiness. Once again, Officer Sandra's version of the events was debunked. Recognizing the severity of her actions, her facade of superiority crumbled before him. She started babbling just like Erica had done when she'd been the one doing the interrogation. Captain Ronald gave her a taste of her own medicine and kept berating her, then mocked her for not being able to speak up. She was an adult after all, and a police officer at that. Then how come she too was finding it hard to reply in a calm, collected manner when interrogated? Perhaps this meant that her interrogation methods were simply too harsh. Erica's tears began to dry as relief washed over her. She could see that her father was winning this fight and realized that she wouldn't be forced to go to the police station after all. But it looked like she would be going soon, probably to make sure that Officer Sandra's supervisor heard the truth about what had happened here from her own lips. He wasn't going to risk her trying to bend the truth to her once again. Not only was Sandra forced to apologize to Captain Ronald and Erica, but she also faced serious consequences for her behavior. Officer Sandra was demoted from her position and placed on probation, which required constant monitoring by another officer tasked with overseeing her every move and reporting back on her behavior. This meant that she had to behave properly and responsibly, or she would be reported to the board of police, who could permanently take her badge away from her if they saw fit. To Sandra's dismay, her supervising officer turned out to be the very rookie whose opinion she had so callously disregarded on that fateful day. Captain Ronald had seen to it that not only had the rookie passed his probation, but that he was the one to be keeping Officer Sandra on a very short leash. As karma's ironic twist dictated, Sandra would now have to face the consequences of her actions under the watchful eye of the rookie she had dismissed, realizing the error of her ways. It seems that justice had finally caught up with Officer Sandra, teaching her a much-needed lesson in humility. Would she learn from it? Well, that remained to be seen, but it was a painful reminder that her authority was not absolute, and that sometimes it paid to have empathy and be understanding towards those who you are supposed to be serving. What did you think of this incredible story? Have you ever heard of a police officer so flagrantly abusing their position of power? And how would you have reacted if you were in the shoes of the rookie cop? Would you have kept quiet or spoken up? Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more.